Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Redemption Thursdays with Rabbi Pinchas Winston of Telstone, Israel. Sorry we ran a few minutes late. I caught in traffic. Rabbi Winston continues a series on the Geula Shalema and how to prepare. And in particular, this week we're learning for the third session in a row about why we have to go through the 3 weeks coming up soon and this summer. We're in the middle of the summer. And Rabbi Winston, without further ado, please take over.
Okay, thank you. The timing actually is very good because this week's Parsha has an important thing to say about this whole topic that is very pinpointed in terms of the underlying causes, what goes wrong in this week's Parsha, actually last week's Parsha too, and it really truth is every Parsha that things go wrong in, all the history. This is the basis of it all. But most people don't focus on this. It's not really the point that comes out, although it should, because it's instrumental and it's certainly the basis for the 3 weeks and the Ben Mitzrayim period and Tisha B'Av itself. And knowing it not only helps us understand and focus more accurately in terms of what we're supposed to be thinking about during these 3 weeks, but also in terms of understanding what's going on in the world today, how the world is, how did the world evolve into what it is today, because a lot of question marks. There's a lot of things. We see it. People keep, some people talk about how it's almost sheker. It's a world of falsehood, lying. Chazal, the rabbis of the time of the Talmud, the Mishnah, had quoted as saying things. One particular rabbi in the Gemara, but as saying that let Mashiach come, but I don't want to be around when it happens. And in case you think, whoa, why? That's the time to be there. Of all the time to be in history, that's the time to be around. So why would they be so hesitant to be living at that time? So you go to the Gemara, then the Sota, or on Daf Tzadi Zayin Amud Aleph in Sanhedrin, which is the same Gemara as the Sota, and it talks about the things that will happen in advance of Mashiach's arrival. One of which is you won't find a place of emes anywhere. A sheker, falsehood, lying, it'll be everywhere. It'll be rampant. And we're finding out how difficult it is to live in a world like this, especially since the Gemara also says that Tamei Chachamim, people who do stand by the truth, people who uphold the truth, will be despised, will be hated. And that's hard. That's difficult to live with, and we see it happening today. Now, it's not so obvious that people say, "Well, you stand for truth, I hate you." That may be in some places, but that's not actually what's going on over here. People think that the other side stands for sheker. In the Torah world, if you believe in God, and we do, and you believe Torah came from God, and we do, and you learn it and you try to live by it, so you have the emes. I mean, it is the absolute emes. So we have that starting point that the rest of the world doesn't have. Secular society, the scientific world, all these worlds, they began from the bottom up, or at least in recent times. In the olden times, they also were religious societies too. But in the beginning of the modern era, they started with a foundation. They built upon the foundation and built, brick by brick, philosophies and theories and ideas. And that's why you listen to advanced scientific theory, and anyone who knows Torah backgrounds, that says God. Why can't you just say God? God's behind all these questions you're asking. This is the answer. They won't come to that, because that's not the direction they're going. It's not the direction they're coming from. Whereas the Torah world is the other way around. We started from the top and working our way down, so to speak, meaning that God said, here's the Torah, here's the manual, here's how it works. There's no experiment, there's no thought, games going on. There's none of this hypotheses. This is the fact. This is the truth. This is I know. I made the whole thing. Now, if you want to go and understand it, want to break it down and understand the details more clearly, that's fine. But this is the system. And I can tell you it works because I made it. And respect it and follow it. So we're coming from the other direction. And because of that, things that are so obvious to us are chidushim, like novel ideas, new ideas to the rest of the world. And we'll see what that means in terms of what this week's Parsha and understanding the 3 weeks. There are a lot of strange things taking place in this week's Parshas Korach. Now, it's not Parshas Korach for everybody. It's only Parshas Korach for the Jewish people of Eretz Yisrael. Because in Chutz La'aretz, because Shavuos came on Shabbos, the second day Shavuos came on Shabbos, so they didn't have, that was not Parshas Naso for them, and as a result of that, they read the second day Yantav reading, so they're 1 week behind. They won't catch up until Parshas Chukas Balak. That's usually when they catch up. double parsha. But in the meantime, it's Parshas Korach for those of us living in Eretz Yisrael. And this parsha has a lot of strange things going on. And first of all, there's the rebellion, right? The fact that Korach can challenge Moshe Rabbeinu seems to us to be very strange. How do you take on Moshe Rabbeinu? So that's not as strange as a thing as it seems, because you see rebellions going on all across, all through the Torah. There's always last week's parsha, and especially for those who hold, and we tend to hold that way, that the rebellion of Korach, even though it follows last week's parsha with the spies, historically it didn't come right after. The spies came at the beginning of the 40 years, and Korach be'adaso came at the end of the 40 years. So most of the people rebelling in this week's parsha probably weren't even alive at the time that the spies went out and failed and came back and got punished. And the whole 19-year period in between, the Jewish people lived quite peacefully, quite orderly. Everything was quite fine. But at the end, Dustin and Abiram, it's like, yay, they're gone finally. Such a pin in the neck, these guys. The entire time too, they go back to Mitzrayim, so they lived a long life. They lived for quite some time, not hundreds of years, but they're at the beginning and they're towards the end, and they go down in this week's parsha at long last. But in the meantime, you have Korach and Dazo. They're very young people, and so for them, getting tired of living in the desert, it was a whole different generation. That was the point. The older generation died out, but it's a whole different generation. So the fact that Korach rebelled, after the spies is not such a question. Second of all, it turns out that there's different levels of this going on. The Arizal has a whole deep discussion in sharp sukkim about this whole rebellion with Korach. It says Vikach Korach. It doesn't say what he took, and there's all kinds of discussions to what he actually took. But the Arizal says what he took really was he took the bad side of Cain. What do you mean? Cain was dead a long time ago. So it turns out that Korach is a Gilgal of Cain, which is going to play into this whole story because Moshe Rabbeinu is the Gilgal of Hevel. Gilgal is reincarnation. So you've got Korach was not the full reincarnation, but of an aspect of Cain, just like Moshe Rabbeinu was also an aspect of Hevel. But for all intents and purposes, it's Korach versus it's Cain versus Hevel all over again in this week's parsha, after 26 generations from the time it actually took place. So that you have this going at the same time, that the earth swallows up Korach is also not so strange all of a sudden, because first of all, as the Mishnah points out, that this was one of the things that God made right before sundown, Erev Shabbos, the mouth of the earth to swallow up Korach. So it was in the cards the entire time. But more than that, if you go back to Parshas Bereshis, when Cain killed Hevel, and God approached Cain and said, "Where's your brother?" And Cain uttered those famous words that echo through history, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Right? And God says, "You better believe it." Right? And God says to him, the bloods, because not just him, but all of his generations that would have been born from him, the bloods of Hevel have been swallowed up by the earth. That's what the verse says. And as the Gemara, the Mishnah points out, that God works midah k'neged midah, measure for measure. Whatever you dish out, that's what you get back in some form or another. So therefore, just like the earth swallowed up the blood of Hevel back at the beginning, so here it swallowed up the blood of Cain at this week's parsha. So it's surprising a bit, but they got warning. First of all, Moshe said he calls on this particular miracle to prove his point, and it makes a lot of sense. Given the whole thing, what's going on, and the sub stories and the backstory and all that. It's still unusual, but not so bizarre. And then of course you have this little rebellion after that. That after Cain, the earth opens up and it swallows up Korach v'Adaso, and then the fire comes down and burns up the incense offerings they weren't supposed to offer because they weren't the right people, as Moshe said. And then there's a Megefa and a plague. And the truth is, of all the things taking place in the parsha, this is probably the strangest of all. Well, one other thing that we have to look at that goes a little before this, but if you just witnessed, this bothered me for years. If you just witnessed Moshe Rabbeinu being vindicated by God himself by having this fantastic miracle take place where the ground opens up and swallows up every perpetrator. It's not like everybody rolled in, the good guys and the bad guys. Like an earthquake swallows everybody up. The hashgacha pratis might save someone by keeping them far away, but for the most, a lot of good people go down in an earthquake because it doesn't distinguish between the good and the bad. That's also hashgacha pratis, but it's a different type, different level of hashgacha pratis. Here, literally, only the people who need to be swallowed up are swallowed up. On Ben Pelas, who was supposed to be one of those swallowed up because he was part of the rebellion, even though he didn't really want to be part of it, but he was part of it, was saved by his wife because she realized this was a mistake. This is not going to end good. And therefore, she gets him drunk, in the tent, so he falls asleep in his bed. So when they come looking for him, they come to collect him for the rebellion. She says, I'm sorry, he's out. He got a little bit too drunk. And through the she actually uncovered her hair so that when they came to get him, they would see it. And being Kedoshim, as they say, holy people who understand that you're not supposed to look at a married woman's hair, they turned around and left her all alone. But when the ground opened up, the Medrash says it opened and split all the way to On Ben Pela's bed. Literally, like a few more inches, he was gone. He was history. And he was saved because of his wife, which is interesting because Korach was really condemned because of his wife. As bad as Korach was, it seems his wife was worse. And they're compared. On Ben Pela's wife who saved him and Korach's wife who basically indicted him by what she said and what she did. Because he came home, he was a Levi. He was all shaven from top to bottom. That's what happened to the Levim at the very beginning in their inauguration, to be servants of God, to serve the Kohanim, the Beis Hamikdash. So they were completely shaven. There's a Kabbalistic reason for that. And he came home. His wife said, whoa, what happened to you? Yeah, Moshe Rabbeinu had to be shaved, all of us, from top to bottom. She said, he's doing this to make fun of you. He's doing this to embarrass you and humiliate you. And he says, well, he did it himself also. He's also a Levi. He also shaves his entire body from top to bottom. So, how does that fit? She says, well, there's this idea called the Philistine, whatever it is in English, but just like, Shimshon, Samson, when he's in the temple with all the bad guys, all the Philistines are making fun of him, mocking, they poked his eyes out. He prays to God for a little bit more strength, one last time to pull the pillars down, to kill everybody in the temple, and he does, with himself inside of it. He doesn't mind that he realizes his life is over anyhow, but he doesn't mind the fact he's going to be killed as long as he can take revenge against the people who have done this to him. And so there's this idea where sometimes people want to hurt somebody else so badly that it doesn't bother them as much if they hurt themselves in the process. Literally cutting off their nose to spite their face. So that's what Korach's wife, claimed about Moshe. He so badly wants to humiliate you that he was prepared to embarrass himself by shaving up all the hair and look so weird, just to make you look weird too. And he buys this, and that gets the rebellion going. So she's like the instigator in this. And On Ben Pela's wife, on the other hand, is the savior, right? Amazing the difference that a wife can make in a marriage, in a relationship, in a life. And the Gemara makes a point of this, to talk about this. Hair also plays a very interesting part in this entire discussion, but that's not for the moment at this situation right now. What is? So after Moshe Rabbeinu, he says to Korach, listen, you guys already have enough on your plate. You're Levium. You have all this responsibility, all this covet, all this service. You won't have to work a day in your life. They're going to bring matanas to you, all kinds of gifts to support you and keep you, serving God in the Beis Hamikdash. Your lives will be very holy. You're very fortunate people. So what do you want more for? So, he says, I don't care about that. You've given these positions out to family members of nepotism, and it's not fair to the rest of us. So it's his own personal agenda, but he involved others as if he was fighting on their behalf too. But Moshe says, fine, I'll tell you what, it's clear I didn't do this, but you don't believe me, so let's do a little test. let's engineer a test where God himself will come down. Now, it's interesting that we go through all this, because why don't you just ask God? Why doesn't God just talk to a prophet? Say, no, I chose Moshe. Moshe's doing exactly. Why did they go this whole episode where, God's kind of like in the back watching the whole thing take place, and we have to, this thing where Moshe says, you take the incense offering, like these pans, you put the coals in for the incense offering, and you do the incense offering, and we'll do it, Aaron will do it, and the one that God wants, he will accept that sacrifice, that offering, and everybody else is going to be in big trouble, very big trouble, because you've done it, unauthorized. Remember Nadavihu? They also brought an unauthorized offering, and look what happened to them. So, of course, arrogance and machlokas is so powerful. It's amazing. You just watch people, how they go down because of their arrogance. They just can't reel themselves in. They just cannot wake up to what they're doing and how they look and how they say. It's a very dangerous, powerful thing. And Korach stood by what he was saying. And there's another reason why too. And that is because he had some kind of nevuah, some kind of prophecy where he saw in the future that Shmuel HaNavi, the great Shmuel HaNavi, was compared to Moshe and Aaron combined, will one day come from his lineage. And he thought it was from him. So he thought, if that's going to come from me, I must be a great person. And therefore, I have the right to challenge Moshe Rabbeinu. He's not treating me properly. He's not giving the proper responsibility, leadership, kavod. So I'm going to be the ancestor of Shmuel HaNavi. And you're right, you will be, but not from you. From your sons, who will do tshuva, who will turn around and support Moshe Rabbeinu in the end and will not go down with you. But he made that mistake. So as a result of that, he accepted this. He accepted this offer. He and his followers, what are you thinking? At some point, you got to get out, walk away. No, they all go through with this. But the most curious point in the entire parsha, as much as the other thing, this is what really got me for a long, what's going on up here? After Moshe so confidently and so boldly says to Korah, here's what we're going to do. Here's how this is going to play out. He turns to God in private and says to God, please, God, do me a favor. Don't accept their offering. Please don't. When I came down to Mitzrayim, I didn't take someone else's donkey. I didn't use a donkey that went back ages into Avram Avinu. I used my own donkey. And I haven't harmed anybody the entire time I've been leader. I've been very careful about that. So please, don't accept their offering. You were just talking to Korach. You know you're right. You know that you've done nothing selfishly. We just heard in Parshas Balosach that Moshe is the humblest person in the world ever, before, after, whatever. Not only that, but he is a prophet on a level that no one can possibly begin to imagine, because he talks to God face to face without a dream. He sees the image of God, so to speak. It's not an actual image, but he's got this vision on a level that even the Avos, the forefathers, were not zeichet to. They're the greatest prophet that ever lived and will ever live. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. So he knows this. He's totally working for God. There's nothing, not a selfish, not a greedy bone in his entire body. So what is he worried about? Is it out of his humility? He comes to God and says this. He really knows the truth. That God's going to burn up everybody else, all the bad guys, like he did in last week's parsha, in Parshas Lech Lecha. Now the other parshas are all the perpetrators. That's what he's just being humble, but he knows the truth, or is he really concerned? So the answer is he's really concerned. But why is he concerned? Because bad things happen to good people, and good things happen to bad people. Period. There's another word for it. There's another word for it. In English, we call it chaos. There's something called chaos theory. If you're not aware of it, basically chaos runs and rules the universe. Now, exactly what chaos is, when you hear the word chaos, it's like, people driving wildly on the highway, or, the kids making a big ball of gun on the road, like literally complete randomness and out of orderness. But it's more precise than that when it comes to science. There's certain rules about chaos, but there's the idea of chaos is the idea, and I can read it to you because actually I have it written down. But the idea of chaos is that there's this. How's it go? The chaos. I'll read it to you. if I can find it, here it is. Okay. This is a quote that you actually will find in Wikipedia. I'm not giving the whole quote because it's very long, but it says the following thing. Chaos theory states that within the apparent randomness of chaotic complex systems, there are underlying patterns, interconnection, constant feedback loops, repetition, self-similarity, fractals, and self-organization. The butterfly effect, which most people have heard of, an underlying principle of chaos, describes how a small change in one state of a deterministic non-linear system can result in large differences in a later state, meaning that there is a sensitive dependence on initial conditions. A metaphor for this behavior is that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can cause a tornado in Texas. Small differences in initial conditions, such as those due to errors in measurements or due to rounding errors in numerical computation, can yield wildly diverging outcomes for such dynamics, etc., etc. You can read the whole thing for yourself if you want to on Wikipedia. It's very, very fascinating. There's some very interesting documentaries on the whole concept of chaos and articles and magazines. But the point is that science acknowledges this idea of chaos as a backdrop for all of creation, meaning that there's a certain randomness or seeming randomness, because there's no such thing as randomness. God, even when God runs the world by hashgacha klalis, which means general hashgacha, which means like more like nature, and the Jewish people by hashgacha pratis, which means personal, individualized divine providence, it's all God. Chaos works for God. What science is in fact saying is that there is method to the madness, right? There's pattern to the chaos. It's chaotic. And why do we say chaotic? Because in life, simply, for example, there are certain conditions that you can predict outcomes, right? Things happen a certain way all the time. And as a result of that, if you say this to a particular person, they're going to blow up. They always do. This triggers something. But the truth is, sometimes they don't. They be a freak experience. For example, that day the person got great news, and the bad news or the insult doesn't affect them the same way. That's part of a chaos. That at a small difference, a small thing, I part of this article I wrote, this documentary I was watching on the concept was I never knew this before. But one of the targets of an atomic attack during World War II in Japan was not Nagasaki. It was not the intended target. It was not the first choice. There was Kyoto, I think it was, another city instead that was supposed to be bombed. And what happened instead, I don't know if that's the actual name of the city, but what happened instead was that the weather became so foggy they could not distinguish anything on the ground to drop the bomb accurately, so therefore they changed the target to Nagasaki. The people of Nagasaki, that's divine providence. God made it foggy there, so they would drop it in Nagasaki instead. That's all. It's all. But it would look like a small little change, small little details. Just weather changes, especially for a small country like Japan on the ocean. There's constant fog, and it's going to happen all the time. That's over here where I live in Telstone. I come home. Some days there's fog in the valley. Some days it's not. Slight temperature change, more humidity. It's happening all the time. But it should make such a phenomenally dramatic difference in the whole process of history and life. I mean, the poor people of Nagasaki, that they, as opposed to the other ones, unbelievable. The ones that were spared and the ones that, and this goes on all through life. Small little changes that people make, how they have phenomenally dramatic impact, and they have equations for this, and they're working with it. They're trying to understand it, but the bottom line is there's a certain amount of randomness to life that they can't figure out, and this is the reason why bad things can happen to good people. Now, we answered often by saying that, well, it's not really bad. How do you know that's a good person? Maybe he's not at studying. Maybe he's actually not studying in private, and God's catching up. But, that's all true. But at the end of the day, Moshe Rabbeinu asked the question himself, why did bad things happen to good people? And the answer was, I can't tell you all that right now. Because the answer to that question is rooted in a level of reality that's not accessible to mankind. It will all make sense one day. People talk about the Holocaust, for example, where why the Holocaust. Well, we don't know why the Holocaust happened exactly. When we say we don't know, it means like why 6 million people specifically, why these 6 million people specifically, and why this year specifically, etc., etc. And people say things like, well, the Eretz Israel is founded in the ashes of the Holocaust. And that's 100% true. There's no question that this is an offshoot, a result of the Holocaust. But if you were to ask, I think almost everybody, there might be some people who would say otherwise, but they have problems. But you ask the average person living here and loving living here, that if they had the choice to spare the 6 million or to have the land and to live on it, I don't think anybody would say to give up the lives of 6 million people. We don't know the cheshbon. Is a certain amount of randomness to the whole thing. It's not random at all. We don't believe in coincidence. We don't believe in randomness. God uses the randomness, the apparent randomness, as a way to hide his hand. People hate injustice. There's no such thing as injustice on God's level. Everything, God can't do injustice. God can't do evil. It doesn't exist by him. It just looks that way by us for reasons of hashgacha pratis and for reasons for free will purposes. But there is this idea of chaos. And how do we know this? Because the Torah tells you right at the very beginning that in the beginning God made the heavens and the earth. And then the next verse says, "Va'aretz ha'isavabohu v'choshech al pnei tehom v'ruach Elokim merchepetz al pnei hamayim." And Chazal say that one verse incorporates all of 6,000 years of history. Tohu, which means chaos or null, and vohu, void, and darkness. These are 4 exiles: the the Babylonian exile, the Median exile, the Greek exile, the Roman exile. The Spirit of God hovering above the water is Zu Ruach Mashiach. The Balatorian points out right there. It's all of history from beginning to end, right in that verse. But it starts off that the land was null and void, which is another way of saying chaos. The tohu is the chaos. And contrary to the way it appears in the Torah, is that it sounds like God first made the world, but the land was still unfinished, so it was called chaotic. But Kabbalah explains it's the other way around. That the chaos pre-existed Ma'aseh Bereshis, and Bereshis was built from the chaos. It was taken from the chaos. It was an ordering of the chaos. Which is why the Jewish people make a Seder every Pesach. Seder is the opposite of chaos. It means order. We could have a Suda, a Yantav Suda, like we have at every Shuas. We'd have a Torah Suda. It's Matan Torah Seinu, that the Torah Suda. No, we had a Suda, right? It's a Suda's Yantav, as we do on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. These are, what do you mean it's a Seder? And why the table of contents? Because the Jewish people were taken out of Mitzrayim to get rid of the chaos and the null and the void, by making Seder in the world. That's why the God, Hashem gave us the Torah. The Torah is the instructions to bring Seder to the world. That's what it's all about. That's the whole history of mankind, of our lives. That's what we're doing here, whether you realize it or not. So the Torah says that this is the backdrop for history. So the chaos that science is discovering so late in history and coming to terms with has been talked about since the beginning in the Chumash itself. In fact, there's a very important Gemara in Shabbos where it says that Reish Lakish asked the question. If you look at the days of creation, it says, "V'hi erev v'hi yom echad." That's the first day. Then the second day ends up by saying, "V'hi erev v'hi voker." There was day, there was night. V'hi erev, there was night, there was day. Yom Sheni, and then Yom Shlishi, the third day, and Yom Rivi'i, the fourth day, and Chamishi, the fifth day. But by the sixth day, it says Hashishi. V'hi erev v'hi Yom Hashishi. There's a hey. At the beginning of the word Shishi, it's the only day that has a hey. So Reish Lakish says that's not an accident. That means something. What does it mean? It means the following thing. The hey is an allusion to the Chamishi Chumshei Torah. The 5, hey is 5. So the 5 books of Torah, of Moshe, right? And the Shishi has a double meaning. It means the 6th day of creation, but it also means a 6th day in the future, which is going to be the 6th day of Sivan, 2,448 years later, when the Jewish people will stand at Mount Sinai. They offered the key to order, offered the solution to chaos. And Hashem, says Reish Lakish, made a condition. This verse, this haste, telling you that Hashem made a condition with creation and said, listen, you came from Tohu, and I have been spending the last 6 days ordering, creation, trying to end the Tohu. It's not completely over yet. Until Mashiach comes, there'll still be Tohu. And I make a condition. Now that we're concluding the 6 days of creating, and I'm saying to you, creation, that the Jewish people will accept the Torah in the future, 2,500 years later almost, then you have permission to continue on and be orderly. But if they don't accept Torah, I will return you back to the null and void, which means that null and void is not over yet. The chaos is not over. It's there like a fire-breathing dragon stuck behind bars in a jail. It's alive still. As long as it's behind bars, you're okay. The moment the lion gets out, be more realistic, but the moment the lion gets out, he can eat everybody and cause all kinds of chaos and damage. So Reish Lakish is saying that Torah is the solution to the chaos, but if we're not learning Torah, the chaos comes out, and it takes over the world. And that's what the Holocaust was. It was chaos running its course because there wasn't enough to counterbalance it. You know why there wasn't enough to counterbalance it? Can't tell you for sure. But it's very coincidental that the Chafetz Chaim, the greatest rabbi of his time, certainly one of them, but he was an unbelievable individual. Talk about how one person can balance out the whole world. He did. And the year he died, that's when Hitler Yamach Shmo Zichro became Chancellor of Germany. And of course, it's just a question of, from that point onward, what's going to happen after that. So Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned. Why is he concerned? He's saying there's chaos right now. Now, if you do your best to order the chaos, because chaos requires a person to come along, if you don't deal with this like a cavity, it's like anything in life is like this. Coffee, because entropy, which is a function of chaos. If you leave a cup of coffee, a hot cup of coffee at the table, it will get colder. As time goes on, it'll just get cooler. That's part of entropy. It's part of chaos. Same thing. You've got decay in your tooth. That's all part of the chaos of creation. It's all part of the entropy that runs our lives on a daily basis. And as long as even your heart does not beat the same way every single moment, and you don't care, as long as you feel fine, as long as you feel good. But I can tell you that from somebody who's experienced, fibrillation, right? Everyone does at some point a little bit, but if it's extended, you start to feel tired and weakish, and you're wondering, am I having a heart attack? Am I about to die? Is this what this? It's like you get nervous because now the chaos bothers you. But as long as your heart can skip a beat, but as you don't skip a beat, you're fine. You're okay. You feel comfortable. That's what happened to Chamberlain before World War II, and Roosevelt, for that matter, right? As long as it wasn't affecting their lives yet. It could. We see the potential is there, but it hasn't yet. It bothers us that this guy is doing what he's doing. We hate the guy, right? But nonetheless, I'm not going to get involved in the war yet. Okay, of course, later on, if the chaos goes unchecked, it just spreads. If you don't clean that tooth, you don't deal with it, don't put a filling in there, take out the decay, it's going to spread. And eventually it might spread to the point the tooth will fall out, and then it might infect the gum and cause excruciating. It is amazing, absolutely amazing. I can tell you firsthand, it is absolutely amazing how much pain a toothache can cause. I used to see these cartoons where the guy's got this whole thing wrapped around his head, he's got a toothache, he's in pain. And until most times you don't get to that point because your parents take you to the dentist early enough. But if for some reason you don't get there enough, or you don't see coming, and it gets to the down to the root, the bone, pain that's unbelievable. Literally unbelievable. That's chaos at work. And if you don't stem it, if you don't consciously, willfully bring order to it, you lose the Beis Hamikdash. That's what happened. The first one, the second one, you lose everything. End up in exile. It's just chaos running its course. That's what it is. And when Korah comes along in this week's Parsha, and he rebels against Moshe, and not just himself, but the people themselves also, they join him. And not only do some join him, but even the ones who don't want to join him don't fight against him. You know what should have happened this week's Parsha? Korah should have got up and said, something? I don't believe that Moshe is working on behalf of the Jewish people, and I'm gonna stand up there. You want to join me? No. Do you know what's been going on for 39 years right now? Anybody who stood up to Moshe Rabbeinu has gotten it but good. Anybody who's gone against God has gotten it but good. I don't want to be that person. You want to go, that's your business. But leave me out of it. Go away. You know something else? I don't even want you to do this. You just go someplace else. You don't like it? Go someplace else. Find another nation to lead or whatever. But don't stare this one. Because every time someone does it, we all pay the price. We've been in the desert now for 39 extra years because the spies did that very same thing. So don't do it. We're not going to let you do it. In fact, you know what? We're going to string you up. We'll take you to Moshe yourself. That's what should have happened. That's what should have happened. It didn't. There's a famous story of a Chassidic Rabbi. I don't know if it's a true story or not, but the story makes a point. I think the point's valid. And he's like, yeah, Tish on a Friday night, for those who've ever been to a Tish on Friday night, it's like a very mystical type thing. Lights are low, people, singing in heart, like very low. And, the Rebbe's like recounting stories and trying to inspire his Hasidim. And this Rebbe was telling them that he was a Gilgul. We're all Gilgulim, but he knew who he was a Gilgul of. And he goes back, I was a Gilgul in this generation, I was a Gilgul in this generation. Finally, he says, I was even a Gilgul in Moshe Rabbeinu's generation. And they're all, whoa, Rebbe, wow, he's going from Moshe Rabbeinu's generation. It's amazing, But one chassid is like thinking, gears are moving and saying to himself, wow, it's amazing. Moshe, you were Rebbe, you were there when Moshe Rabbeinu was leading the Jewish people in the desert, right? And they're all humming, it's like, and this chassid, like, he's very curious from the back, right? And he yells at Rebbe, you were there when Korach challenged Moshe, and now the other Hasidim, this is how the story goes. I'm not making this up. Now that the Hasidim are like, no, who's this guy? What's he? That's no chutzpah. Let's just go with the flow and keep your questions to yourself and get a private audience, but not now. And they're like, he's ruining the tempo of the entire thing. But he's not intimidated. And the Rebbe goes, yes, I was. So finally the Chassid, he calls it, Rebbe, who'd you side with? The Hasidim are like, they're ready to kill him. He's like, I don't physically kill him, but how dare you? This is the Rebbe, he's a tzaddik, Gamor, Moshe Rabbeinu. Clearly he would have sided with Moshe Rabbeinu. What kind of course are you asking? But the truth is that what people forget is that the Chumash that we learn, the stories that we read, are not the way they would have appeared had you been there. This is the story through God's eyes. God's telling us, he dictated these words to Moshe Rabbeinu the way that he saw it. So it's so obvious that Korach was a Rasha, but it wouldn't have been if you'd been there. Just like people get fooled today by leaders and the people they follow, they sound like Sadiq. Shabbatai Tzvi is when, today he's the biggest Rush in the world, But back in his time, a lot of important people, a lot of God-fearing people fell behind him. Because living in the moment, it's very confusing. And this Rebbe apparently understood where this chassid was coming from. And even though the chassidim were like, how dare you? The Rebbe very calmly put his hand and said, and he answered, side with. We waited to see who was going to win. And the first time I heard that story, I was like, whoa. It's like, and it woke me up to how easily we can be deceived into thinking that had we been there, the Garden of Eden, God says, don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Which word did you understand? Which one did you make a mistake about? God said, yes. It's like, don't take a cookie from the jar until after supper. When you're putting your hand in, you're going against the word of your mother. You might do it, but But Adam thought he's doing a mitzvah. The spies thought they were doing a mitzvah. And the people who fell, behind them thought they were also doing a mitzvah until God said no, and then it woke them all up, and they all changed their mind on the spot. You have to understand the Torah is portraying history from a Kodesh Baruch Hu's perspective, and you have to understand it because otherwise you get duped in your own generation. What's going on? And so many people do. So many people are. And if you're not going to bring order to the situation, you understand how then you're basically letting chaos run amok. And when that happens, it overruns you. And the only way you can possibly be saved is by a miracle. If you yourself are, cleaning your house. Like, you can't just let the dust build up and say, okay, dust, go, be gone. You have to get a duster and clean it off. You got to put your shoes together to make sure they're together, or one will end up someplace else, like on a telephone wire or something like that. Right? That's the nature of it's entropy. You have to consciously use your free will to end the chaos. When Korach showed up and he did what he did and rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu, whatever Seder they had until that time was gone. So now Moshe Rabbeinu knows that chaos has taken over the situation. The tohu that Reish Lakish will later warn us about is taken over the camp. And because of that, now bad things can happen to good people. And Moshe is saying to Hashem, they may not have the merits because they didn't do anything they're supposed to do. They may not have the schus to have everything work out utopian-like. But listen, I have been putting myself in the line for the longest time on my behalf, because I didn't take a donkey. That's symbolic of much bigger things. He has a whole list of things that he's been doing L'Shem Shemayim for 40 years. What are you talking about? Just a donkey back in the beginning. You gave up your life. Even your wife complained that you're not coming home on time enough because of all your responsibilities. So Moshe says, please spare them because of me. Why? Because it's the biggest schus of all to know the truth. Lies, living in a world of sheker, living in a world of falsehood is convenience. Because you can convince yourself there's no such thing as God. And there's no such thing as, there's no truth about that. But God is patient. He stands back. He gives people room. Bad people prosper, etc., etc. So it gives the impression that you can get away with this type of a thing. So people don't believe in God. They don't believe in Torah. Now they can do whatever they want. Now they're morally free, because they don't believe in morality. They don't believe in absolute truth. So they only have opinions. My opinion is like this, your opinion is like that. But there's no absolute truth. So what I care? Yeah, it's fun. But you know something? As David Melech said to his Baruch Hu, let the evil destroy themselves. And they do. Over time they do. Because that's the way the world is. If you want to live by falsehood, you can get away with it for a certain period of time, but in the end of the day, you just simply waste your life. You lose your opportunity. Korach, Vadasso, and everybody else in history today, past, present, future, who follows a life of sheker is wasting their life. They may be having fun, smiling, but they're going to die having wasted their life. And even though that may seem like no big deal, as long as you die with a smile on your face, this is the beginning of the story. There is a world to come. And then forever, you have to pay the price of that wasted life or lives, depending on how many Geula a person's gone through. But to know the truth, even though it might hurt, even though it might be tiring, it might be taxing, but to know the truth means you know what's real. You know how to plan your life. You know how to make use of the time on the earth that you have. There's nothing better than that. That's the most meaningful thing you can do. So Moshe says, if you accept their offering, they're going to get the impression that you can be a korech and get away with it. And then they're going to ruin their lives and miss the point of everything. And that's disaster. So please, on my behalf, I'll give up my schuyot. On my behalf, show them the truth so they can walk away from this. But you know something? Despite all of that, what do? They come back and they rebel anyhow. They still come back and say, Moshe Rabbeinu, you caused this death to all these people. What are you doing? Are you nuts? Crazy? Yeah, because that's what chaos is. It's insanity. And it's the backdrop of creation to get rid of. It's there what draws our free will out. So there's another Megaf and there's another plague, and finally God, but it's all part of the process of getting back to the order. It wasn't just an overnight thing. You had to get back to it. Korach destroyed it, messed it up a lot. These peoples are still suffering from it. When they come to complain to Moshe Rabbeinu the second time, it's still part of the influence of Korach. And finally, with the staffs and all that, things started moving in the right direction, and will, hopefully, from this point onward. But we know the story anyhow it goes, how it ends. But that's really what the 3 weeks are all about. Everything I just told you right now, that's the 3 weeks. The spies went out at the beginning. They came back in Tisha B'Av. because it was a time of chaos. The 3 weeks themselves, in my separation, that verse talking about Tohu, null and void, happens during the 3 weeks. Tisha B'Av is the height of that chaos, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the spies failing their mission, and all the things that have gone wrong for the Jewish people in history. Chaos. That's what it is. So the Beis Hamikdash, that was the ordering element. The Beis Hamikdash wasn't just a house of God. It wasn't just a place to go and see miracles. It was that centerpiece, that point around which the entire universe could be ordered. And you can think that you can live without it. Even if you're living a Torah lifestyle, Torah, mitzvahs, Shabbos, kashrus, all these things. Without the Beis Hamikdash, you're still only living partially by the truth, which is why chaos still affects us. Europe boasted some of the best yeshivas in the last couple hundred years. The best learners. We don't even come close to them today. There may be more people learning, as they say, because of technology and the situation. But the reality is that they were way better learners. Those yeshivas were stronger, bigger Kiddush Hashem, clearly by the way people died. And yet chaos overran them in the end. So the 3 weeks are to remind us of the dangers of chaos and why we have to do everything we can to bring order to the world. Because if we don't, no one does. And that's why we sit down every Pesach to make a Seder, to remind us that we're the ones, nobody else. You want God to do it? That's a miracle. That takes zchuyot and comes off your cheshbon later on. That's our job. And that's how you earn your keep. Shabbat shalom.
Well, Rabbi, thank you. You answered my question right at the very end. Was it where we know that everything comes from Ma'aseh Bereshis and even before? Well, I was asking where the 3 weeks were, the origination of the 3 weeks, and that was during the time of Tohu Vavohu. You're saying?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so I always also understood, probably from you and all the learning done together through the years, but that. Like you said, if people don't conduct themselves by learning Torah and attaching themselves to Hashem, that the world just goes automatically back to the world is always supposed to be in this chaos state. But what keeps it going is that the fact that we are trying to hold it together, let's say, by creating order, by keeping Torah and mitzvahs. And
I mean, the thing is, it's like a water behind a wall, behind a dike, right? The water, it's like pushing all the time. The fact that you have no water on your side is because the wall is holding it up. The moment the wall goes down, the water comes flooding in and kills everybody. So the trouble with it with most of chaos is that it's like a cavity. As long as the cavity is not bothering you, you don't care about it. It hurts a little bit. You can live. You can still chew on it, right? But the reality is, it's moving in, and in a very short period of time, you don't deal with it. It's going to cause major problems that you regret you didn't take care of it earlier. So that's the problem. There's a certain part of miracle of life where as much chaos is going on, there's still a fair amount of order that gives people the wrong impression. They can sit back and let things just slide. And that's wrong. The moment you see a korech, the moment there's a bit of disorder, the moment there's already a movement in that direction, you have to respond to it because it will grow. It will grow. And it'll get to a point where it become uncontrollable. And then, of course, the Kosh Baruch Hu has to step in and do corrective devices, which is what World War I was, World War II is, and all the disasters that mankind has faced. It's just the result of people letting chaos go its full distance without stopping earlier.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. It was very inspirational. And everybody, don't forget to look at 36.org and pick up books like this, Preparing for Redemption, Where Am I? And the newest book, Happiness, Please. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you all next week. And please give us your comments on Facebook Live or YouTube channel, because Rabbi Winston would like to hear how you love his shirim, like the rest of us do.
Just if you like them, is good enough.
Have a good Shabbos, everybody. Thank you for joining the broadcast.
Okay,
bye. Thank you, Rabbi.